Quinn Carter ducked into the dim glow of the Monterey Bay Aquarium just to escape the noise of his life and the endless ringing of his phone. Outside, the world knew him as the tech millionaire who sold his first app at 19 and now ran a multimillion-dollar AI firm in Silicon Valley. Inside, he was just a man who hadn't slept in 3 nights and was starting to feel like the walls of his penthouse were closing in. He shoved his phone deep into his coat pocket, ignored the 23 missed calls from his assistant, and walked straight past the ticket counter with a nod to the front desk manager who recognized him and had long since learned not to ask questions. It was quiet, peaceful. Blue lights shimmered off the tanks like moonlight. He drifted through the otter exhibit, past the jellyfish, and then he stopped. In the center of the deep ocean gallery, a woman stood barefoot on a stepladder, arms crossed, staring into the shark tank like she was trying to solve a war. Her long, dark blonde hair was twisted up in a messy braid, and she was wearing a faded hoodie with the words Marine Life Rescue peeling off the back. She didn't notice him. "Excuse me," Quinn said quietly. She jumped, nearly falling off the ladder. "Oh my God, don't sneak up on people when they're observing sharks." He raised both hands. "Didn't mean to. Sorry. You looked like you were solving something important." "I am," she said, climbing down. "One of our female hammerheads is guarding the others from a new male we introduced. She's being territorial, which doesn't usually happen this aggressively in captivity." She paused. "Sorry, you probably don't care." "I do," Quinn said before he could stop himself. "I mean, I don't know anything about sharks, but I like watching people who care about things." She blinked at him, then tilted her head slightly. "You're not from here." "No. Just visiting." He didn't offer more. He didn't want to be Quinn Carter here. She narrowed her eyes. "You're not a tourist either. You didn't take a single photo of the jellyfish tunnel." He laughed. "Guilty. I came here to hide." "From what?" "Everything." Something softened in her face. She looked back at the tank. "Yeah, I get that." He waited. "What's your name?" "Sylvie Thorne," she said, not looking at him. "I run the shark research program here." "Quinn." She glanced at him. "No last name," she teased. He shrugged. "Just Quinn." "Well, just Quinn. I was actually about to feed them. Want to watch?" He nodded and followed her through a staff-only door up a steel staircase. She tossed him a clean lab coat without asking his size, then tied her hair up tighter before stepping to the edge of a massive overhead tank. "Don't fall in," she said. "You'll ruin my whole week." He chuckled and watched her work, her hands sure and steady as she fed the sharks, her voice low and calm as she murmured observations to herself. She was focused, passionate, and completely uninterested in impressing anyone. He hadn't met a woman like her in years. Afterward, she handed him a mug of lukewarm coffee from the break room and sat beside him on a bench overlooking the kelp forest tank. Her shoulder brushed his. Neither of them moved. "So," she said, "what are you actually hiding from?" He looked at her. "Meetings. Investors. Everyone who wants something. You don't seem like someone who lets people take from him. You'd be surprised." She didn't push. Just sipped her coffee and watched the slow, mesmerizing dance of the kelp in the water. "Why sharks?" he asked. She smiled then. "They're misunderstood. Everyone thinks they're just predators. But they're complex, intelligent. Some species form social bonds. Some communicate through body language. They're survivors." "You studied them in school?" "Yeah. Marine biology PhD. I did my research in Bimini and the Bahamas. I came back to California after my dad got sick. And stayed." She nodded. "This place needed help. I took over the program. It's underfunded, but we're making it work." He glanced at her, thoughtful. "Do you like it?" "I love it. Even when I'm exhausted." There was something in the way she said it. A quiet honesty. No pretense. Quinn looked away before he could stare. He hadn't planned to stay long, but an hour passed. Then two. Eventually she stood. "I've got to prep for a tour group." He stood too. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "Every day." He smiled. "Then maybe I'll come back." She raised an eyebrow. You don't even like aquariums. Maybe I like something in this one. She didn't answer, but her cheeks turned a little pink before she turned and walked through the staff door. Quinn stood there a long time after she left, watching the sharks circle in the blue. He hadn't expected anything today, but something about her Sylvie Thorne, shark expert with a coffee habit and no patience for nonsense, had lodged in his chest like a hook. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to pull it out. The next morning, Quinn stood in front of his closet, staring at rows of tailored suits and Italian leather shoes like he was preparing for a board meeting instead of returning to an aquarium. He reached for a button-down, hesitated, then shoved it back and pulled on a charcoal Henley and worn jeans instead. No watch, no cufflinks. Nothing that screamed money. He wasn't sure why he cared, but he did. By the time he stepped through the employee entrance at the aquarium, the place was already humming with early prep. A few interns wheeled buckets of fish past him, and someone in a wetsuit nodded as they passed. No one stopped him. He'd remembered Sylvie's name and told the front desk he was expected. He wasn't, but she didn't seem like the type who'd mind. He found her in a small lab tucked behind the jellyfish exhibit, bent over a microscope, one gloved hand holding a shard of what looked like shark cartilage, the other scribbling notes in a journal covered in saltwater stains and ink smudges. Still not taking photos, I see, she said without looking up. You noticed. I notice everything, especially people who don't belong. He leaned against the doorframe. Is that your subtle way of telling me to leave? She peeled off one glove and finally met his eyes. If I wanted you gone, you'd be gone already. That made him laugh, low and surprised. Fair enough. She stood and pulled her braid over her shoulder. It was a little messier today, and there was a smudge of something dark on her cheekbone. You didn't come here to watch the sharks again, she said. So what is it this time? I came for you. That made her pause. Not smile. Not blush. Just pause. You don't know me. Not yet. She narrowed her eyes. Why me? He stepped fully into the room, letting the door fall shut behind him. Because you're the first person I've met in a long time who doesn't want anything from me. And you think I'll be flattered by that? No. I think you'll be honest about it. Sylvie turned back to her microscope. You're not the only one who comes here to escape, you know? I don't exactly go looking for entanglements. Maybe not. But you didn't stop me from coming back. She didn't answer that, which wasn't a no. He pushed off the wall and moved toward the table, eyeing the fragments she'd been studying. What are you looking at? Bite patterns. One of our males got too close to the female I told you about yesterday. She didn't like it. He leaned in. So this is forensic shark science. Something like that. He watched her hands. She moved with precision and confidence, but there was a quiet intensity beneath it. Like her mind never really stopped. You always this focused? Only when I want to be. When do you stop? She glanced at him. Why do you care? Because I'm trying to figure out what kind of woman walks barefoot into a dangerous tank room, stares down a shark, and doesn't flinch when a stranger shows up twice in 2 days. I didn't flinch, she said, because I'm used to distractions. He tilted his head. Am I a distraction now? You're something. I haven't named it yet. That intrigued him more than it should have. Before he could reply, an older man in a blue windbreaker poked his head in. Sylvie, the donor tour's early. You've got 5 minutes. She groaned. Of course they are. Want me gone? Quinn asked. She looked at him, then grabbed a spare clipboard off the counter and thrust it into his hands. No. You're a volunteer now. Don't talk. Don't correct me. Just follow my lead. Before he could respond, she was already striding down the hallway toward the main gallery. He followed, clipboard in hand, trying not to look like someone who'd never followed anyone in his life. The group waiting for her consisted of 3 well-dressed couples and 1 woman in a red silk scarf who looked like she'd never touched a fish in her life. Ladies and gentlemen, Sylvie said, all cool professionalism now, thank you for coming early. I'm Dr. Thorne, head of marine research and shark behavior studies. This is my assistant. She glanced at Quinn. Eli. He nearly laughed aloud but bit it back. They moved through the exhibits as she spoke about migratory patterns, conservation efforts, and the challenges of funding species-specific programs. Her voice shifted when she talked about the realities, the cost of maintaining saltwater tanks, the struggle to secure grants, the limits of public donations. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was laying out the battlefield. By the time the tour ended, the silk scarf woman was nodding approvingly and one of the men handed over a check. Sylvie thanked them, shook hands, and didn't so much as glance at Quinn until the last donor disappeared around the corner. Then she turned to him. "Eli?" I panicked. "You didn't do anything. That's what you told me to do." She stared at him for a long beat. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. "Okay, I'll give you that." He grinned. "Do I get to keep the clipboard?" "You can keep the name too if you want." He took a breath. "What if I want you to know my real one?" Her expression shifted. "You're not just some guy who wandered in, are you?" "No," she crossed her arms. "So who are you?" He hesitated. Then, "Quinn Carter." The weight of it fell between them. Her brow furrowed. "The Quinn Carter?" He nodded. She looked away, jaw clenched. "That's why the front desk let you walk in without a badge." "I didn't want to lie. You just didn't want to admit it." "I didn't think it would matter." "It matters now." "Why?" She looked at him then, eyes sharp. "Because I don't do well with people who hide things." He stepped closer. "I wasn't hiding. I was trying to breathe." For a long second, she didn't move. Then she turned and walked past him, back toward the lab. He started to follow, but she stopped in the hall. "You can still come back tomorrow," she said without turning. "But next time, come as yourself." Then she disappeared around the corner, leaving him standing there with a clipboard, a fake name, and the sudden, unfamiliar ache of wanting something he wasn't sure he deserved. Quinn arrived the next day without an alias, without a clipboard, and without expectations. There was no guarantee she'd speak to him again, not after the way he dropped his name like a confession. But something about her had taken root in him, quiet and stubborn, and he wasn't ready to let it slide into memory. He found her outside this time, kneeling beside a transport tank near the loading dock, coaxing a juvenile leopard shark into a mesh carrier. She wore rubber boots and a windbreaker zipped up to her chin, sleeves damp from elbow-deep work. "You're late," she said without looking up. "I didn't know I was expected." "You weren't. But I figured you'd come." He crouched beside her. "That confidence or hope?" "Observation." She tightened the lid on the carrier. "You're not the type who lets things go easily. Neither are you." "What's going on?" "Transfer day. One of the small research centers in Santa Cruz lost 2 sharks in a filtration malfunction. We're loaning them one of ours until their tank stabilizes." He watched her secure the container, her movements brisk and practiced. "You always handle these alone?" "No. But I trust my own hands more than anyone else's." "You don't delegate?" "Not when lives are on the line." He stood as she did, brushing his hands on his jeans. "That's a heavy load to carry." "I don't carry it. I just make sure no one drops it." She turned toward the building, her pace steady. He walked beside her. "Last time I was here, you told me to come as myself," he said. "I did." "Good. Then we can stop pretending we're strangers." He looked at her closely. "So we're not." "Not anymore." They reached the back entrance, where one of her interns waited with paperwork. She signed quickly, handed the carrier off with strict instructions, then turned back to him. "You ever been on a dive boat?" she asked. "Only once. In Greece. It was less research-based." She grabbed a duffel bag from the bench and tossed it over her shoulder. "I've got a tagging trip in 40 minutes. We're short a deckhand. You game?" He didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." They drove in her beat-up truck, no radio, windows down, the scent of salt and sun streaming in. She didn't make small talk, and he didn't try. It was enough to sit beside her, the silence not empty but charged with something unnamed. At the harbor, she introduced him to her dive team without ceremony. No one questioned his presence. They were too busy loading equipment, checking tanks, prepping sonar trackers. On the water, the wind picked up and the coast fell away behind them. Sylvie stood at the bow, hair whipping free from its tie, eyes scanning the horizon. Quinn kept low, helping secure gear with instructions from her lead technician. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was real, tangible. A world far from the glass towers and manicured offices he was used to. When they reached the target zone, Sylvie suited up fast, strapping on her gear with the fluidity of muscle memory. She didn't ask for his help. She just looked at him once, her expression unreadable behind the mask, then backflipped off the edge and disappeared beneath the water. Quinn exhaled sharply, watching the surface ripple and still. "She's got nerves of steel," one of the crew muttered beside him. "Last week, she pulled a hook out of a tiger shark with her bare hands." Quinn's jaw ticked. "That doesn't surprise me." She resurfaced 15 minutes later, dragging a line behind her. The team pulled a small shark onto the platform, Sylvie following close behind. She moved fast, calm hands, clipped orders, a tag inserted just below the dorsal fin, then water poured over the gills until the shark twitched and was released back with a clean splash. Quinn helped haul the gear back on board. She stripped her wetsuit halfway, face flushed from the cold, hair soaked and clinging to her neck. They locked eyes across the deck, the world narrowing to wind, salt, and something electric sparking between them. "You still with me, Carter?" she called. "Always." Back at the dock, the sky was streaked with orange, the sun dipping low. They didn't talk on the drive back. She kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, and he watched the way her fingers tapped with residual adrenaline. At the aquarium, she parked and turned off the engine. "You're different out there," he said quietly. "So are you." "I didn't do anything." "You didn't flinch." He reached over, fingers brushing hers. "Neither did you." For the first time, she didn't pull away. "My father used to take me out before he got sick," she said suddenly. He said the ocean was the only place that ever made sense to him. No politics. No noise. Just instinct and balance. Quinn nodded. "You're like that too." She stared at him, her face unreadable in the fading light. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." She opened the door before he could say more. "I've got to unload data." "I'll wait." "You don't have to." "I want to." She hesitated, then gave a single nod and disappeared inside. Quinn leaned against the truck, the sea air chilling against his skin. He didn't know exactly what was happening between them, but it was real, unfiltered, and unlike anything he'd known. He wasn't just intrigued anymore. He was invested. And the feeling scared him more than any boardroom ever had. Sylvie didn't see Quinn for 3 days. Not because he disappeared, but because she didn't let him in. She needed time. Not to think she already knew what she wanted, but to decide whether she could handle wanting it. On the 4th morning, she found a steel thermos and a folded note on the bench outside the shark lab. The note wasn't signed, but she knew the handwriting. Inside the thermos, black coffee, still warm. No message. Just presence. That afternoon, she walked into the touch pool exhibit and found him crouched beside a group of kids, gently guiding a little girl's hand toward a bat ray. "She's nervous," he said without looking up. "She can be," Sylvie said. "They're soft, like wet velvet." The girl gave one hesitant stroke, eyes wide, then giggled and ran off. Quinn stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. "You're surprisingly good with children. They don't expect anything complicated." "You've been waiting here?" "I've been helping here." She crossed her arms. "You could be in a boardroom right now." "I canceled my meetings." "To hang out with stingrays?" "To be near you." She didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the hallway behind the exhibits. He followed without needing an invitation. In the privacy of the equipment room, she faced him. "You know this is insane, right? You live in a world of private jets and acquisition deals. I live on grant money and Saltburns. I don't care." "You will." "No," he said quietly. "I won't. You don't even know what I've given up to be here." "Then tell me." She hesitated. "I was offered a research position in Mauritius. Fully funded. 5-year contract. I turned it down when my father's cancer came back. By the time he passed, the offer was gone. I stayed here because I made a choice, not because I didn't have one." Quinn stepped closer. "Then you're stronger than anyone I know. I'm tired of being strong. Then let me carry some of it." She looked up at him. the fight flickering behind her eyes, then dimming as something more vulnerable bled through. I don't know how to be with someone who doesn't run. Then stop running. He reached for her hand, slow and certain, and she let him. That night, they didn't talk about sharks or donors or anything that belonged to a version of their lives before they collided. They walked the empty aquarium after hours, their footsteps echoing through the dimly lit galleries. He bought them takeout from a restaurant she'd never be able to afford on her own, and they ate it sitting on the floor of the staff break room. She told him about her mother who left when she was 8. About the years she spent diving in silence because it was the only place she didn't have to explain herself. About the scar on her thigh from a sting in Tahiti. He listened like every word built a cathedral. He told her about the time his company nearly collapsed from a bad merger. About the panic attacks he never admitted to anyone. About the art school scholarship he turned down when his father told him to focus on something that pays. And then, in the quiet between confessions, she said, "I want this. I just don't want to lose myself inside it." "You won't," Quinn said. "I won't let you." 2 days later, he invited her to Monterey Plaza, where he'd rented a private rooftop space overlooking the bay. She arrived in jeans and a windbreaker, her hair damp from the ocean. He wore a black sweater, sleeves pushed up, no watch. The space had been transformed. One long table set for 2 under string lights, white linen, and a candle flickering between them. A string quartet tucked into the corner played something soft and reverent. She stared. "You did all this?" "I made a few calls. I didn't even say yes yet." "You didn't say no." She moved to the table, running a hand over the smooth linen. "Quinn, this is beautiful, but I know," he said, walking toward her. "You don't need anything from me. That's why I want to give you everything." She turned to face him, the wind catching her braid. "What does that mean?" He looked at her, quiet intensity in his eyes. "It means I bought the building next to the aquarium." "What?" "I'm donating the top 3 floors to marine research and conservation. You'll have full autonomy. No strings. No oversight. Just a blank check and the freedom to run your program the way you've always dreamed." She stepped back, stunned. "You can't just, I can." "And I did." Her hands shook. "You think I'll fall in love with you because you gave me a building?" "No," he said, voice low. "I think you already did. I just wanted to show you that I see you. All of you. And I'm not afraid of how big you are." She stared at him, breath caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. Then she stepped forward and kissed him. Not because of the gesture. Not because of the donation. But because for the first time in her life, someone had met her where she stood and didn't ask her to shrink. The kiss was quiet and deep and full of promises that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with trust. Later, as they lay on a rooftop couch wrapped in a blanket, watching stars blink into the sky, Quinn brushed his thumb over her knuckles. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "We build something," he said. "Not just the lab. Us." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're not scared." He kissed her temple. "Terrified, but I've never been more sure of anything." Months later, the Quinn Carter Marine Research Center opened its doors. Sylvie cut the ribbon in a blue wetsuit, flanked by volunteers and local press. She gave no speech, just smiled wide and pulled Quinn into a kiss in front of everyone. He didn't care that it made headlines, because the woman who once stood barefoot in a shark tank, fierce and untouchable, now stood beside him herself, whole and completely in love. And for the first time in years, he wasn't running from anything. He was finally home. The official dedication of the Quinn Carter Marine Research Center had come and gone, but the real work had only just begun. Sylvie stood on the second-floor balcony overlooking the Pacific, her hands resting on the cool steel railing, the wind tugging gently at her cotton blouse. Below, teams of new researchers moved between labs and tanks, the hum of focused urgency filling the air. Behind her, Quinn stepped out of the glass doors, a folder tucked under one arm. "You're late," she said, not turning. "I brought pastries. That buys me grace." She glanced over her shoulder. "Only if they're from the place on Lighthouse." "Where else?" He set the folder down on the metal table and opened the small pastry box with a flourish, revealing 2 delicate almond croissants and a lemon tart. "You really are trying to bribe me," she said, eyeing the tart. "I'm trying to celebrate you. There's a difference." She raised an eyebrow, but her lips curved slightly. "What's the folder?" He pulled out a sheet and handed it to her. "A proposal. From the Monterey Coastal Initiative. They want to partner on a coral repopulation program, use the tanks downstairs for reef reconstruction. They're offering a grant." Sylvie scanned it, her fingers tightening just slightly around the paper. "You didn't push this through? They reached out themselves. You've built something real here, Sylvie. They see it." She folded the sheet carefully and set it aside. "You know, sometimes I wake up and still expect to be in my old apartment, rushing to beat the interns to the feeding charts. I can't believe this is mine. Ours." He walked to her, resting a hand on the railing beside hers. "You earned it. Every inch of it." She looked up at him, her eyes clear. "I never expected to share any of this with anyone. I never expected to find someone who made me want to stop moving." She leaned into his side, letting her shoulder press against his. "I think we're both still learning how to stay still." "I've been practicing," he said, brushing a kiss against her temple. "You're a good reason to keep trying." Later that day, Sylvie met with her head of research to finalize the expansion schedule. While she reviewed proposals, Quinn disappeared into town. When he returned, he found her in the West Wing, kneeling beside one of the newly installed coral tanks, monitoring water clarity with a handheld device. "I need you to come with me," he said. She looked up. "Where?" "You'll see." He didn't give her time to change, just took her hand and led her to his car. They drove along the coast until the cliffs opened into a narrow inlet she didn't recognize. At the end of the winding road stood a weathered gate newly restored. Beyond it, a stretch of land sloped down to the sea. "I bought it last year," he said as they stepped out. "I've been restoring the house on the edge. Thought it'd be a good place for quiet. Or for someone who likes salt air and solitude." She blinked. "You did this for me?" "I did it for us." They walked to the edge of the bluff, where a small modern structure of glass and dark wood overlooked the waves. Inside, the house was still unfurnished, but the walls were finished, the floors gleamed, and the scent of cedar lingered in the air. "This is..." She trailed off, running a hand along the sleek island counter. "It's perfect. I didn't want to offer you just a place to work. I wanted to offer you a place to breathe." She turned to him. "I already have that. With you." He stepped forward, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Then let me give you something permanent." Her breath caught. He opened it. A delicate platinum ring, a single sapphire flanked by thin diamonds. The ocean in stone. "I didn't plan this with a flash mob or a rooftop," he said, "because I know you hate that. I just want to build a life with you. One where we protect what matters. Where we wake up near the sea and go to work saving it. Together." She stared at him, every nerve in her body lit with awe. "I won't make you shrink," he said. "I'll never ask you to step back. I'll walk beside you. Always." Tears welled in her eyes. "You already do." He slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered. They didn't kiss right away. They just stood there, forehead to forehead, the Pacific crashing below them, hearts steady. Weeks passed. The center expanded. The coral project launched. Sylvie gave her first keynote at a global marine summit and didn't stumble once. Quinn watched from the back of the room, hands in his pockets, pride written across every line of his face. They got married at the edge of the bluff, just the two of them, a justice of the peace and the waves. No tuxes. No gowns. She wore a navy dress that fluttered in the wind. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled up. Her father's old dive watch was tied to her bouquet. Afterward, they returned to the lab where the staff had transformed the conference room into a makeshift celebration strung with lights and old dive flags. Someone made a cake shaped like a hammerhead. Sylvie laughed so hard she cried. They danced barefoot on the concrete floor while the team cheered, The same way they danced in the break room that first night, only this time, it was forever. Years later, their photos lined the hall outside the research wing. Quinn and Sylvie, side by side, soaked from a dive, holding hands on a cliff, standing behind a tank as a group of children pressed their faces to the glass. They built a life where science and love coexisted, where ambition didn't mean sacrifice, where two people who never intended to fall in love found something bigger than the ocean between them. And every evening, just before the sun dipped below the waterline, they walked the shoreline barefoot, fingers laced, still stunned by what they'd created. Not just a center, but a world.